how can I be like, poor me, poor me, poor me? I feel like there's always somebody who's had it worse. Always. One of the mini therapists was like, you've had a lot of trauma in your life. I'm like, have I?
Two high school groups known as the Jocks and the Punks clashed. The tragic confrontation would end up dividing the entire community.
You have to be patient because it's not up to me when I heal. I watched a friend like bleed out here.
There's like 15 people around him, just kicking him and hitting him and beating him up. And he was just like in the fetal position on the ground.
I went to therapy and I had the lady having me write things down. And then sometimes you're like, oh, talking about it helps. So you talk about it all the time, but it doesn't. It just happens in its own time. That part that stays with me with Brian and that whole group, that's gonna be with me forever. It's just helped shape me into who I am. And it's been very important in my healing to just be patient. My name's Jacqui Gritzan, and I'm from Amarillo, Texas. So Cabinet Crisis, that was Brian's band. Last Temptation of St. Barbie was one of the houses we hung out at, the band name. And then they would make zine. We're Mexican. My dad is second generation. My mom's first generation here. I just blanked.
¿Usted quién es? ¿Cómo se llama usted?
Like that was, of course, a big part growing up. Like we had Freddie Fender, the Tejano music, and like a family reunions, and of course the ranches. It was all Spanish, and they spoke Spanish to each other. They didn't really speak it to me. They yelled at me in Spanish. Like I got that a lot. So it's just a lot of like identity crisis. My sisters are 11 and 13 years older than me. And so I kind of came around a little bit later. So with me, I didn't have as many like cousins around me all the time. I kind of grew up by myself. Like it was me and by the time I got older, my sisters were kind of out of the house. So it was me and my mom a lot, because my dad, like I said, he worked on the ranches and he drove trucks. And so he was gone a lot of the time. So yeah, it was just kind of me there. I would get board games and I'd play like the Hungry Hippos. I would have to do both sides or play Sorry by myself. I would do all the colors and, and that was the 90s too. So friends were everything. They were your whole world at that point. I mean, because you don't have social media, you don't have Facebook, you can't connect with people through video. We barely had the internet, you do the chat rooms, the dial up, but even that was few and far between. So like your friends were your lifeline to everything. You could call on the phone and you're with them all the time. Like that's what you want to do when you're that age. You don't want to be home. You want to be with your friends. It's like, that's your world. In high school, I wanted to do all the like the Spanish club and the book club, like all the clubs, like, you get into that. Going into my sophomore years when I kind of stopped wanting that, like it was so hard to try to join all that stuff and do all the things and fit in with all the people that you just kind of stop. It's like a turning point because you like try so hard to be this person, and then when you finally go, I don't even care, that's when you can kind of be more confident and you come into who you are. That's kind of when I got into that like alternative sort of subculture style. When you first start meeting people in the subcultures, you have, the punk kids with the spikes and the chains, and they all like, you're like, oh, that's a little scary. And then you have the goth kids who wear all black and their eyeliner, and then you have kind of the hippie kids, and you have the raver kids, with the Jinko pants and that were huge and chains. And I think that what gravitated me towards them was they were just so accepting. You didn't have to be a certain way or dress a certain way. I could wear whatever I was wearing and still go hang out with the punk kids. Like they were just, generally speaking, just more welcoming. Now there were different houses we hung out at. Like there was a house where the punk kids lived. So you'd go like to Tyler Street, or the St. Barbie kids on 8th Street. So you'd go to different houses because they all kind of had their own group. Everybody knew each other. Everyone was still friendly. And it's still Amarillo, so it wasn't really big. That's one thing I remember is music, a lot of bands, and at little venues or at people's houses and garages, just all sorts of bands. I mean, I guess it is kind of how they identified themselves, how we identified ourselves. When shows like music came, especially because they would do festivals, like they'd have like 3 or 4 different bands, they would all go. And Brian was a central person to that. He was the person who, when he came back from hitchhiking, that's what he wanted. He wanted to bring music here and he wanted to build the scene up. And so he did.
When Brian first got it into the punk scene, we were kind of shocked. It was different. His dad even tried to cut his hair. But then it kind of grew on us.
Brian was just very, I mean, he was just warm and happy and nice. And he would get, I mean, he was a person too. He would get frustrated and upset about things, you know, like any human. But for the most part, he was just nice. I mean, there is so much, you know, but Brian was very welcoming. If he saw somebody that he didn't know, like a new kid at a show, he would go up and introduce himself to the kid, and he would make that person feel included, and that's just who he was. I remember even shows where, like, I was at with friends, and he'd be like, "No, let me walk you to your car." Like he would make it a point to just be there for people. He was one of the leaders. It's so hard to describe the scene in the group because there's so many different personalities. Like you have people who are quiet and they do poetry and they don't do anything. And then you have the ones who, you know, scream punk music, or you have the ones who want to do like spray painting, and you have the ones who don't want to do any of it. Like it's just such a broad, there's so many people and there's so many different personalities. So I think that's kind of part of the other stereotype. People were like, oh, you'd see these kids and they're, you know, drinking or whatever, and oh, that's how they are, but not all of them are. A lot of them, different circumstances. They were not always in school, or, you know, they had harder home life, so it wasn't always part of being in class. You didn't really see them in school if we're like specific for that. Back then, like you couldn't have colored hair. You have colored hair, you get sent to North Heights, which is the alternative school. And so I knew a bunch of kids who got sent to alternative school because they wanted spikes in their hair, or, you know, they wanted purple hair, or just little things like that they would kind of get sent off for. And they're smart kids, you know? And so a lot of times some kids would even just go to graduate early because they didn't want to be in the system anymore. My mom, and she'll tell you now too, like she preferred obviously my friends who looked nicer. The friends who came over with spikes or, you know, that sort of thing, they weren't always that welcome. I think her image was skewed. I think in her eyes, these friends were what brought about my new, okay, I'm gonna skip school, that sort of thing. I think all that stuff would happen anyway. And it was that change in me that found the friends, you know, if that makes sense. I would go to school sometimes, or sometimes I wouldn't. But this particular time, we decided not to go to school. And we were sitting there hanging out, because we had to go back to pick the friends up for lunch, you know, because I had the car. And I'm sitting there, and then my mom pulls up, and my friends were like, "Jacqui, your mom's there." I'm like, "What?" And I just looked over, and my mom's just mad. And she's like, "Get in there right now." And okay. So I go, and I'm inside, and that's when she pulls out, the teacher shows all the notes. Like I had friends who had written, like, you know, I was going to the doctor, or I was not feeling well, and, you know, sign her name, and they had all the notes. And I mean, I was in so much trouble. Probably most of my life, like when Dad was gone, my mom would pick me up from school and then take me home, and I would get home like 3:30, and she'd go to work at the phone company. Her shift was 4:15 to 10:15. She had a break right in the middle. So as long as I was there for that break, and as long as I answered that phone, called and checked in and hung up, and I could be gone again till she got home. There are places that we would hang out, like Roasters, the coffee shop, or places like that where everyone was just used to you. But you go to the mall and you do get a lot of the people who are like looking at you weird, or like, oh, a shock. There was always a shock.
Okay, but wait. You say no, but if you saw her walking down the street, you wouldn't point fingers and make fun, or?
Most of the violence that I knew of, I was never really there, but I do remember seeing black eyes, or the stories, or, oh, I got jumped. It was, well, scary, and not even scary. It was more like sadness and shock.
The punk clique really was not treated well. They were bullied. They would get picked on, they would get spit on.
In high school, like I just remember, I'm having a hard time articulating it, but kids who were, I went to my first suicide funeral when I was 17, You know these people, your friends, and you think, wow, this guy, Brian, he's really nice. And then somebody else is just jumped on you and attacked you because of what you look like. It was sad. You see the black eyes and the bruises and the scrapes, and you hear the stories. At that point, I'd been hanging out with Brian a lot. He'd call me every night and we would talk on the phone. We would hang out a lot, but then when my friends started dating his brother, we hung out a lot. So we would spend a lot of time together. He would call from his parents' house or pay phones because he didn't have a phone. So I'd have to wait for him to call me.
What do you think that y'all meant to each other?
I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I hate to say anything now because you don't know what other people were, and I don't like to overstep, but so I just say that we were really close. I don't know. The whole day is confusion, like going from that to the fight to the killing. And then the confusing part is like, why? Like, why did that happen? It didn't have to happen.
On the evening of December 12th, the IHOP parking lot was packed with teenagers. Among them was Dustin Camp in his 1983 Cadillac. The punks numbered 5 boys and 4 girls. Eyewitnesses estimate the number of jocks at anywhere between 20 and 50.
That night, we had all gone out. Everyone was there. I mean, there was a bunch of people there hanging out, and we were just hanging out. Like, everyone was having a good time. Something happened at IHOP the week before. So that night, they were talking about it because some of the kids that went to Tascosa were like, oh, hey, they said they're going to be there. And in my perspective, it was almost like they can't stop us from going to IHOP. Like, we're going to go to IHOP if we want to go to IHOP. Like, no, like, not necessarily like, yeah, we're going to go fight. It was more like, yeah, let's go show them that they can't kick us out of IHOP. Like, even that now sounds so silly to me. Like, it's probably the same thing as everything else. It starts like, oh, let's just show up. And then it just escalates and then no one can stop it. When we walked into IHOP, the manager was like, hey, your friend's across the street. Because somehow, like, you lose track. There's so many people. Everyone's like, oh, oh, Brian's getting beat up. The manager's like, your friend's getting beat up. Okay, so there was maybe 5 of us that went across the street. And I remember Brian, he was on the ground and people were around him in a circle kicking. And then honestly, like, I just remember everyone's like pulling people off. I mean, me too, I guess. You lose track. Like, it really is a blur.
As the two sides fought, Dustin Camp weaved his car through the crowd, first swiping punker Chris Oles.
After he hit the first guy, Rob started yelling, let's go, let's get out of here.
But Dustin Camp did not leave the parking lot. Instead, he made a fateful decision. He spun his car around and drove straight for Brian Deneke.
And then the next real clear memory I have is Brian's on the ground by the curb and the ambulance came and people are crying and screaming and I'm just like rubbing his leg, like, because he's cold, and the ambulance comes and they're just standing there, just look at him. And that's clear. Because I was like, why aren't you helping him? And the guy just shook his head like, they're not helping him, like, he's gone. Like, even at the police station, that's kind of when the group was just like, group hug, and you just like, you're with these people. And it just became, you're kind of protected, I guess, because you have this group that's with you and you're going through the same thing and you're in this. And I remember, like, with my mom, because I remember, like, my mom was really upset. And I think about my kids, how I would feel with them at this point. But I just remember kind of like lashing out, like, you didn't even like my friends. I'm going to be with my friends. Like, I mean, she even went to his funeral. I didn't sit with her. I was with my group, and she went and she was just there being supportive. And like, that was jarring and kind of a breakdown moment. Needless to say, I went to therapy a lot. And that's kind of, at the beginning, my mom was very much like, no, you need to, because from the beginning, I didn't remember a lot of it. And they're like, no, you need to, let's go try to help you. You need to probably face this and remember this and get through this. And I went a lot, but I never like cracked that door open. And I probably didn't really push for it to be open either, because I kind of have a feeling like maybe if your mind is blocking something, then maybe it's for the best. There's local news. That was a big deal. But I mean, within the next year that Dustin Camp was going back to school, like it was like nothing. And so I remember a lot of us were like letter writing or reaching out to people and trying to say, hey, look, this is what happened. You know, our friend died. They're not doing anything about it. And what happened was the Oprah was in town.
Oprah Winfrey's in Texas facing a federal lawsuit claiming defamation of the American beef. An Amarillo cattle feeder sued her and vegetarian activist Howard Lyman after a show on which Lyman suggested American beef could spread mad cow disease.
And so there were people covering that, and Dustin was already on trial. Like, we were in the middle of court when the first story came out with, I think it was Texas Monthly. He was sentenced, and that's when all the attention came.
Camp's punishment for killing a punker would only be probation.
Dustin Camp has been sentenced to probation for the murder of your son. He won't spend a night in jail.
He didn't spend a night. I don't know if he even spent an hour in jail, period.
And so then after that, that's when it was like MTV and Dateline and Elizabeth Vargas is here and all the people and all the stuff. And it was a little overwhelming, but it was well after he'd already been gone. And so you kind of, like us as a group, me, I can't really speak for anyone else, but you know, you're in this like group, you know, and then you get through it, you know, and then the trial happens and it's there, and then all this news happens again, so you're kind of back in this, they kind of take you back to this spot again, you know. It's easy to keep the things inside and not think about it, like, not gonna, like, this happened, but I'm not gonna deal with it. When the court came about, yeah, you had to rehash it and you had to go through it again, and they were all asking questions. At that point, I'd had my son, my oldest son, and so I didn't want to go to court because after Brian died, there was also the people who were throwing bottles at the Tyler Street house or throwing radios or running women off the road, you know, who they thought were punks. Like, it got kind of scary. We were kind of like, you already killed our friend. Like, what else do you want? What else do you want? I was subpoenaed, so I could only go in through the closing arguments. But I asked if they didn't have to use my testimony, if they could not, because I had my son, and like things got so scary towards when that happened. I just didn't want to be driving down the road with my kid and, you know, have someone run me off. But I think for a while there, it was the same story, the same things. And it gets to a point where, like Jason Deneke, he wouldn't do interviews anymore. Because, you know, you get to a point where you're like, oh, man, like trying to get through this, you know. He died the week of like semester tests. And needless to say, I didn't do very well on any of them. And I think at that point, like my parents were just trying to get me through it. I did get my GED. I don't think I was really healed. And so I think I was just trying to like put Band-Aids on things or like make ends meet, if that makes sense. And even, you know, my son's dad at the time, I was like, hey, I'm out. Like, I'm not going to be here. Like, I will come back and visit, but I'm not going to live here. I want to go to Vancouver or San Francisco or New York. I want to go somewhere. I don't want to be here. I think I'd been on a plane like twice, maybe 3 times. It's not something I thought of. But my older sisters were like, hey, Southwest is hiring. You should apply. It's benefits. It's, you know, a good job. You should do it, especially because I didn't really know what else I wanted to do. All of a sudden, have the job and I'm in San Francisco or all over the place, you know? And I was having a lot of fun. I mean, I was in my 20s and I'm traveling around, you know, and having a good time. And so it was a fun environment for somebody in their 20s. But home life was just rough. I was a single mom, and so my son was having to stay with my parents a lot, and he was little, he was 6. And in fact, I always tell my oldest, I'm like, Luke, God, I'm so sorry. Like, we grew up together. Like, especially not even just being a young mom, like I was dealing with some crap, I was dealing with a lot of stuff and emotional stuff. I remember it clear, it was a Christmas, and I had just spent the whole day at the airport, standby, and I went home to Amarillo. Like, I flew, because I was in Dallas, so I flew to Amarillo, got to spend a few hours, then I had to fly back to Dallas, and I had to get a hotel room, and I just remember, like, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm done. And so that was it. And I don't think it was necessarily a rock bottom, but I think it was like, I just wasn't happy, and I feel like I tried so hard I just wanted to be this person that people, like, even at his school, like, I dressed differently, I dressed not really how I wanted to, more preppy, I guess, because I wanted to put a good impression. I want people to think well of me, because you hear so many bad things about yourself all the time, you start to feel them. And I think I had just been living that for so long, like trying to be this person that I just really wasn't happy with. And, I was still struggling to pay my bills, and, I didn't know what I was doing, and I did the best I could, but without my parents, man, I don't know. Like, I'm very grateful for them, because they helped so much with Luke. Like, I could not have done it. They were my other partner, like, I couldn't have done it without them. Being a parent just changes you, it changes your whole perspective. Like, I don't even just think about Brian or my loss. Like, I'm a parent now. I think about, like, what would I do? How would I feel? And it just makes you, I can't imagine it, So that kind of is what every now and then it will hit. Like, I tell my mom all the time, like, God, man, I'm sorry I was a brat. Like, ooh, I'm sorry I ran away one time just for a few days. But I'm like, I'm sorry I did that. And she'll tell me now, she's like, I tell my friends all the time, like, Jacqui may have caused me the most trouble, but she's the only one who's ever, like, said sorry and thank you. Because I appreciate them. That has helped me heal myself. While I enjoyed my life, I had Luke, and I was home every day, and I was really involved in my church, and I was directing the youth group, and I was doing all this stuff. I still felt like trapped in a sense.
American Airlines announced in October it was hiring 1,500 new flight attendants. 20,000 applicants responded. So many, Americans stopped taking resumes after 8 days.
Applied at American, thought I'd try it again. My son was like, yeah, he liked flying. He liked flying for free, so go on and try it again. So about 10, almost 11 years ago, I moved to the DFW area. But really, I think it was probably a way just to kind of get away from where I was, and try to maybe get to someplace new. Like, healing, health, whoever I was going to be. Like, I just needed a change. I met my husband there and have more kids now. And the past 10 years in this life has just been really healing, because it's just calm. And it's been very important in my healing to just be patient. When Jordan and I first started hanging out, and people out here don't always know my story and my association with all that. But I'm like, oh, these people are wanting to talk about this movie.
A movie based on the 1997 events between two high school groups that rocked Amarillo and sparked a nationwide conversation about tolerance in the justice system is making its much anticipated premiere.
If Mike and Betty are okay with it, then we're okay with it. This their child. We all dealt with the loss, but they dealt with the loss the most. And Jason, that's their family. Most of the friends who have seen it, not everyone's dealt with it. I think it brought a lot of memories back, because it was not only like, oh, we did all these interviews, 20 years ago. This is like something now, and it's fresh, and it's bringing it back up. And not everyone dealt with it. And then, it gets personal, because it's kind of like, it's our story too, in a sense. My son, my oldest, he's 26, he has a piercing. And, when he was at Amarillo High, like, what would I do? How would I feel? And it just makes you, I can't imagine it, you know? So that kind of is what every now and then it will hit. I feel like I have healed a lot in this past decade or even 2 decades, but that part that stays with me with Brian and that whole group, that's gonna be with me forever. It's just helped shape me into who I am as far as empathy. Like, you don't know what other people are going through, and just because somebody looks a certain way or talks a certain way or likes a certain thing, that doesn't mean you should judge them, because everybody's different. I mean, even me, like now, people who know me now probably don't think of me like running around with a bunch of punk kids or whoever, like skipping school or, you know, even at work, you know, like I see kids sometimes like on the planes and they have like their piercings, and I'll be like, hey, I know that band. But it's, you know, you just don't picture it. So you have to be more empathetic to everybody, especially in this world, like the climate we're in now. Like, there's so much hatred. It's just, I tell my kids all the time, like, you just need to love people, like love each other and be nice to people. I can be kind to everybody, but it's being kind to myself that sometimes gets in the way. But, you know, my family, my sisters and my nieces and my mom, and we have a group text, we talk every day, and I still don't speak Spanish. I have a peaceful life.
Well, that is this episode. Hope you'll join us next week.